So my name is Daniel Hendricks. I am with Transpo Group. We are working with the city and Nicole on updating the transportation system plan for the city. So tonight I'm here to present some of our work, sort of show our progress, what we're coming to. The main discussion tonight is going to be around the project list, how we develop those projects, and sort of identified what the needs are for the community looking out into that 20-year planning window. So first, I want to just sort of back up, give a high-level overview. What is the transportation system plan and what are its objectives? So number one, it's supporting the overall comprehensive plan. It's really supporting and being used to develop the transportation element of the comprehensive plan, really identifying what the vision is for the transportation network over the next 20 years. So as part of that, we're looking to update it to make sure that we're meeting the Growth Management Act requirements, make sure that we're aligning with what the state is mandating, make sure that's being incorporated into this update. This third bullet here is what we'll be talking about tonight, is integrating and prioritizing those transportation improvements, making sure that they're serving all travel modes. That's one of the mandates from the state, that we're planning for multimodality, looking not only at vehicle travel, but also pedestrians, bicycles, transit as well. As part of this, we've reviewed and updated transportation goals and policies in the transportation element. I believe that has been brought to you in a previous discussion. And then one of the things, like I mentioned, the state is mandating looking at multimodal travel. So as part of that, they're requiring cities and agencies to set multimodal level of service standards. So we'll get into that in a little bit. I'll discuss what a level of service standard is, how it's used, and how that is sort of taken into the project development phase. And finally, the last part of the transportation system plan is looking at all those improvements that we've identified and figuring out how that compares against historical transportation revenues and sort of build a plan for how this transportation system plan can get implemented. So I will pause there for a second if anybody has any questions on the transportation system plan, but if not, I can move forward into the project list.
Quick question. Is that a new title? The system, that word? Is that added? There's always transportation plan.
So the transportation element is a chapter in the larger comprehensive plan. The transportation system plan is essentially a separate document that gives more detail that supports the transportation element.
Okay.
So it's essentially a supplemental document that gives you like all the meat and potatoes that goes into the transportation element.
Thank you.
Okay. So diving into the project development. So I just wanted to give a high-level overview of how we develop the project list, where the projects come from, how we identify what the needs are. So we first start by looking at all the previous transportation planning work that has been done by the city and throughout the region. So we start with the city's 6-year transportation improvement program. Those have already identified a lot of the immediate transportation needs throughout the city, so that is the foundation of our project list. But then we also look at other regional and local transportation plans. So that includes the previous comprehensive plan, as well as some of the other studies that have been conducted throughout the region, and looking at the recommendations that have come out of those planning efforts. And so here I will mention that we really look to regional agencies and other regional plans to make sure that we've identified and include any of those projects of regional importance within the plan. So that includes the Benton-Franklin Council of Governments Regional Transportation Plan. Projects in that plan that have been identified in the city of Richland are incorporated into our project list. And we also look at project recommendations from the Benton-Franklin Good Road Association, making sure that their recommendations get incorporated into our list as well. And so here I also mentioned that we look at projects and identify them based off those level of service standards that I mentioned. So level of service standards are essentially metrics that the city adopts against which the transportation network is evaluated. And so I mentioned that the state is requiring that these standards be set for all travel modes now. So we'll get into this as we walk through this presentation. The city has adopted or is adopting level of service standards for vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles and transit as well. And the final thing that I will note here that goes into the project list are new roadway connections. So as the city grows and develops, additional construction and development of the transportation network is going to be required to accommodate those new uses and the new areas that are developed. So we've included a lot of those on our project list as well. I will note here that a lot of the projects on our project list are identified for federally classified roadways. So those are roadways that are incorporated into the larger network of federal classification. So essentially the benefit of doing that is that those roadways are the ones that are more eligible for a lot of funding programs. So really in order to get grant funding for these projects, they need to be on a federally classified roadways. That would be a principal arterial, a minor arterial, or a collector. And so really by focusing on those projects, not really identifying improvements for local streets, we want to make sure that the projects that we've identified have an opportunity to be funded through grant funding. So I will pause again here, see if there are any questions on sort of some of the sources that we use to identify the project list. But if not, we can sort of dive into some of the details about level of service, how we come to these different project recommendations that we have. Okay, great. So let's start with the vehicular projects. So I mentioned level of service standards. So the level of service standard that's set for vehicles is based off of intersection delay. So that's looking at the average delay that a vehicle experiences when traveling through an intersection. That's typically measured on this A through F scale, where A is really no congestion, very little delay when you're going through an intersection, and then F is all the way at the bottom, extensive delay, extensive queuing. So the city sets their level of service standard at level of service D, sort of right there in the middle. The importance of that is that you're sizing the system to make sure that it can accommodate your peak demands, but also isn't operating with excess capacity throughout the day. If you're planning for level of service A, that essentially means that you're planning for really wide roadways, really big intersections, which are operating way under capacity a lot of the time. So you really want to plan for something in the D or E level, which is consistent with other agencies throughout the state.
Just a quick question real quick
Yeah.
on that. Is safety considered at all during the level of service? Is it strictly the waiting time?
So the level of service really just focuses on the waiting time. That's not to say that safety isn't considered elsewhere. So as you know, the city has a comprehensive safety action plan. So through that plan, the city has looked at historical crash data to identify what those safety concerns are. And so a lot of those recommendations get pulled into the transportation element in the project list, but it's not specifically looked at here through this level of service standard. Okay, and so this slide here summarizes and shows a map of how the intersections throughout the city are forecast to operate in 2045 after that 20-year planning window, with the expected growth in the city. So future traffic volume forecasts have been developed for the city based off the land use assumptions that Nicole and her team have developed. And so based off that, we have identified this list of intersections that are expected to operate below that level of service D standard. I guess let me back up. I will say that level of service D is applied to signalized intersections and roundabouts. Level of service E is applied to stop-controlled intersections. There are some additional nuances in some of the other level service standards. I won't get into those tonight. That's a very detailed discussion. So we'll leave it with that. So these intersections are those that are forecast to operate below the level service standard and therefore would require improvements as development occurs.
So these level of service standards right here are based on their current operation. They don't take into account like the couplet project that's happening in Richland and what that would project it.
So these look at future volumes. So this incorporates some of those improvements as well. So yeah.
It would take that into account.
Yes.
Then. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So the analysis looks at sort of planned improvements that are sort of scheduled for implementation in the city as like a baseline condition. So this it looks at projects that have been identified, planned, are being developed, and are likely for implementation in the near future. And so a lot of these projects on the list, these are areas where improvements are needed, where initial plans and ideas for improvement have been discussed, but sort of they're not scheduled for near-term implementation. So you'll see like some of these intersections, like the Duper Tail, the first two intersections on this list, there's plans for improvements there. But those aren't near-term improvements that we've identified as like the baseline condition, if that makes sense. So sort of piggybacking on all of that, a lot of these intersections on this list are intersections that are already on the city's radar. So all of these that have the asterisks, either 1 or 2, are intersections that are already planned for sort of long-term improvements, or intersections that have been identified for improvements as part of other traffic analyses that have been conducted throughout the region. That's for the Lewis and Clark Ranch project in West Richland. So these are areas where improvements would be needed, and we will get into that on the next slide as to the types of improvements that are necessary. But I will pause again here to see if there's any thoughts, questions about any of these intersections and these operations.
I just thought it was interesting. Like Dupertail, maybe today it's not considered to be bad. That's why I was asking about the safety piece, because if 240 is there and there's no planned changes, and it's in between two residential areas, so you have a lot of foot traffic and other modes of transportation going through there, I guess it kind of, like hopefully there's other areas of opportunity to improve it based on the data that we're collecting there now. But if we're not analyzing the level of service to consider safety, then I don't know, it would just be nice to see like flashing lights when they're about to change and stuff, because the speed limit is so high. So it feels like stuff needs to change, but it might not, if it's still going to be an F in 20 years, seem like much will happen there.
Yeah, I will say that safety gets incorporated into some of the other level of service standards. So we're starting with vehicles here. We're going to switch over after we get through this discussion and talk about pedestrian bicyclists. And so we've identified and are setting level of service standards that look at the level of comfort that the roadways provide for pedestrians and bicyclists. So those level of service standards sort of get at safety in that way.
So this is just one metric, and there's multiple metrics. You're just starting with the first one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So based off that map that I showed previously, a lot of those areas where you saw the reds, the level of service Fs, are those areas where we've identified improvement projects. And so on this list here, I've identified what the sort of high-level improvement types that we've identified to address some of those issues. So at a lot of those intersections, it's either adding lanes, making changes to signal timing, or at some two-way stop control intersections, that's adding a new signal or putting in a roundabout to address some of those high side street travel delays. When we're looking at roadways, some of these corridor segments that are shown with the solid blue lines here, we're looking at some more like corridor-wide improvements. So you can see on this list, we have the Downtown Loop project shown, but we also have some roadway extension projects, some roadway improvement projects. We have improvements to Vantage Highway up there to add additional capacity through the corridor as development occurs in the northwest part of the city. And then the last thing on this map are the dash connections. So those are new road connections. So I talked about that at the top. As development occurs throughout the city, some new roadways are going to be needed to provide connectivity and accessibility for some of these new areas of development. And so you can see a lot of those new roadway connections are located in the Badger Mountain South area and up in Horn Rapids. Those are the areas that are being developed. And so those are the areas where a lot of the new roadway network is going to need to be completed.
But you also have like new roadways going into through the critical areas. Is that to alleviate traffic like on SR 240 or?
Yes, so I think you're talking about RW27, if I
Yes.
correctly. Yes, so that's the Kingsgate Way extension project. So that's a new roadway connection that's intended to parallel 240. And so as development occurs, that is needed to provide additional accessibility in the north-south direction. SR 240 already experiences congestion today, and so as development occurs, that's only going to get worse. And so that is intended to help alleviate it and help provide additional accessibility in the western part of the city.
In the plan, it didn't cross south of Van Giesen. So what is the RW 30? I mean,
Yeah, so we're planning we're looking at a new connection that's going to extend from essentially Keene down in South City, go up through that part that's shown there, extend into the county land that's there, that's the segment that's missing, and then extend up to Van Giesen. I think that's a long-term connection that has been identified and discussed.
oh, I'm confused. Oh, so like the RW6 is supposed to go all the way up and connect to R30?
Yes,
RW30.
exactly. Yes. So we've just not shown the part that's not within the city. So it's going to be a
okay,
continuous
okay.
connection.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just
okay.
not shown on
I'm
here
just trying to
because it's
follow.
not. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
No. Apologies for that. Yes. So that'll be a continuous road, just to provide connectivity, basically from Vantage Highway down there all the way down to Keene.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, all right. So this slide here gives some more specific details about some of the specific intersection improvements that have been identified on this list. And so the first two on this list are improvements to intersections along SR 240. And so the first two that you'll see are grade separation of the intersections on SR 240 at Van Giesen and Dupertail. So these are improvements that have been identified as part of the 2020 North-South Corridor study that was conducted in the region. And so those are pretty big improvements that are going to have to be further discussed and figured out with WashDOT. So as part of this process, we began some of those conversations with WashDOT. They were part of our steering committee that helped us identify and build out this project list. And so in the future, further discussions will have to be held to exactly identify and nail down exactly what those improvements look like. But this is sort of setting the groundwork to figure out more specifics on how to best address congestion at those intersections. And then we go along here on this list. We have some improvements at some of those other intersections on 240, at Jadwin, and at Swift. Those are some signal timing changes, like you don't need the full grade separation at those intersections. So just some simple intersection improvements or signal improvements will be sufficient to address some of the future congestion that we're seeing at those locations. I won't walk through everything on this list. I guess I will pause if there's any specific intersection on this list that you'd like me to discuss in more detail. I'm happy to, but I won't sort of walk through everything if there's nothing of greater interest to you all. I guess I will also touch on the last intersection there, the Columbia Park Trail and the Step 2 intersection at the exit to the SR 240 off-ramp. So again, that's another WashDOT intersection that is experiencing some delay congestion issues today. So we've identified potential improvements for that intersection, whether that's a bypass lane, added lanes, metering. But again, that's an improvement that's going to have to be discussed and further identified with WashDOT since it's one of their intersections. And so we recognize that that's a challenge today, and that more work is needed at that intersection.
You're talking about RW 39 on your slide?
RW 39, I believe so.
Yeah. So do your discussions and your planning, do you also, on that one in particular, work with the railroad? Because that's when it's worse, is when the railroad is, when the trains are coming through and
Yeah.
backs up.
That will have to be a discussion. I mean, that'll be something that goes into all the analysis as well. I mean, because future analysis is going to be needed at that intersection. And so all of that will go into those discussions. I will say right now, all the discussions are very preliminary. It's just right now, we want to make sure that we establish as part of the transportation element, as part of the transportation system plan, that there is a need at this intersection. What exactly that need is, will need to be further defined in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I have this slide here talking about some of the new roadway connections. I won't dwell too much on this since we already touched on it, but again, sort of just looking at providing additional roadway connectivity in those developing parts of the city. Okay, and so those are our vehicle projects. I will pause before we move on to active transportation. But if there's any additional thoughts, comments, discussion, questions about any of the vehicle projects, happy to take them here. Okay, perfect. So getting into active transportation, I'll start walking us through the level of service standards for pedestrians and bicyclists. So like you were talking about, there's a need to look at safety as part of transportation needs going out into the future. And so this metric that we're using to identify pedestrian bicycle needs, it gets at that. And so the metric that we're using is called level of traffic stress. Level of traffic stress is a measure of the level of comfort and safety provided by a pedestrian bicycle facility. It really looks at the degree of separation provided from between pedestrian and bicyclists and vehicle travel, and sort of what the volume, speed, and sort of roadway size is that the vehicles travel along. And so we've set these standards to really look at identifying how not only where a bicycle and pedestrian facility is provided, but also how well it performs on this comfort level scale. Because we want to make sure that the bicycle and pedestrian facilities that are provided within the roadway network are identified and constructed to match the roadway context on which they're provided. So in order to do so, the first step that we did of this process was to identify a pedestrian network where we want to provide pedestrian facilities. So as part of this, we identified a network that's made up of primary and secondary roadways. The primary network is really the backbone of the system. It's really connecting major destinations throughout the city and is meant to provide those most comfortable routes. And then the secondary network is more so supportive of the primary network. It's providing connections between parts of the primary network, oftentimes on less direct routes or areas where walking is a secondary mode. And so we've identified this network here to really highlight the locations where we want to make sure that we're providing pedestrian connectivity. So this is meant to provide access to key destinations, whether that's schools, parks, commercial areas, making sure that those areas are served by pedestrian facilities, and that pedestrian facilities on these roadways are developed and identified to be consistent with the context of the roadway. And so I will move forward and show how the level of traffic stress got evaluated for this network. And so based off of the level of traffic stress matrices, we assign I skipped over that on the previous slide. Let me go back. So level of traffic stress is measured on a 1 through 4 scale. It's sort of similar to the A through F scale that I discussed for the vehicles, where level of traffic stress 1 is essentially comfortable for users of all ages and all abilities. That's essentially your best score. Then level of traffic stress 4 is on the other end, where it's really only used by those most confident of riders or other people who really have no other choice. So the goal here is often to provide level of traffic stress 1, 2, or 3. Those are sort of indicating areas where users of sort of a greater degree of range of abilities are able to use those facilities and would be comfortable using them. So going back to the scoring of the pedestrian network here, we are looking at this network here. And so we're seeing that pedestrian level of traffic stress 1 is shown in blue, 2 is shown in green, 3 is shown in yellow, and 4 in red.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the LTS levels. Is it based on, so there's nothing, it's not the amount of use, it's just how easily it's used, or it's,
Yeah, so it's based off of the sort of degree of separation provided by that facility. And so the metrics that are used to measure level of traffic stress are vehicle speed, vehicle volume, and the speed limit of the road. Speed, volume, and number of travel lanes, excuse me. And so those are measured also against the level of separation from the vehicles. So different scoring tables are used based off of whether a sidewalk adjacent to the roadway is provided or no sidewalk is provided at all. And so based off those metrics, a score of 1 through 4 is assigned to get at sort of how comfortable that facility would be for a user. Does that make sense? Is that a little bit more clear? Great, okay. And so looking at this network here, you can see that a lot of the city is in these blue and green level of traffic stress 1 and 2 colors. So that sort of indicates that more of the network, especially in the downtown part of the city in central Richland, is achieving this decent level of traffic stress. And so a lot of this area already actually has sidewalks constructed. So it's really showing that those sidewalks in those areas are providing this good level of comfort for pedestrians.
Raising my hand, sorry. Hi. Question on, so I understand that this is pedestrians and bicycles, but I think what provides an LTS of 1 for a pedestrian potentially might be an LTS of 3 for a cyclist. And how do you differentiate between the two or consider that for planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually have 2 different scoring metrics for both of them. So this is what we're looking at right now is just pedestrians.
Oh, okay.
And so
Thank you.
you will see that a lot of what's out there today currently scores pretty decently for pedestrians. Once we get into bicycles, it goes down a little bit more. So a lot more roadways are level of traffic stress 3 and 4 currently. But we can get to that in a bit. And so the way we've set our level of traffic stress standards for pedestrians is based off of the 2 different network priorities that we've identified. So for the primary network, we're trying to achieve a level of traffic stress 1 or 2, really because the primary network is where we want to provide those more comfortable facilities. For our secondary network, the one that's supportive of that primary network, we're saying that a level of traffic stress 1, 2, or 3 is acceptable. So really anything that's LTS 4 is only what needs to be improved.
I think, Daniel, just for the commission, just the way I'm thinking about this is like on 240, they just added that separate sidewalk. Okay, yeah, so that's where, but talking to the bicyclist, he's supposed to be on the road, not on that trail, right? Okay. It's both, okay.
Yeah, that I believe is a multi-use path. So those multi-use paths are something that we've identified for use by both pedestrians and bicyclists here, so that they would achieve a better level of traffic stress for both the pedestrian and bicycle modes. Exactly, yeah. So that's essentially where the bicyclists or pedestrians would have to move onto the roadway, be right next to really high speed, high volume vehicles, which would indicate that level of traffic stress 4. Okay, I will move forward and we can move into the bikes now. So this is basically the same setup. We identified a primary and secondary network. This is very analogous to the pedestrian network that I just talked about. Primary really being the backbone of the system, really providing direct access to a lot of those key destinations. And then your secondary network is supportive of that primary network. I will say that for the bicycle network, the secondary network is often identified on low volume, low speed local streets, just noting that those streets can accommodate shared use between bicycles and vehicles because the level of vehicle use is a lot lower. And so I'll move forward here to the level of traffic stress map that we've identified for the bicycles. And again, you can, if we sort of compare this to that pedestrian level of traffic stress network, you see a lot more yellow and red on this map, indicating the LTS 3 and 4. So that's sort of because your bicycles are on the roadway with your vehicles. They're a lot closer to the vehicle traffic. And so when you have bike lanes there, they provide less of a separation from the vehicles. So that would indicate potentially a level of traffic stress 3 or 4.
Hi, Mike Rosatell can't be here, but he did have a question about the pedestrian network.
Yeah, absolutely.
He asked if we had a linear footage or percentage of transportation system in town that lack pedestrian infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. So yes, we looked at the network. Only about 20% of the city's pedestrian network does not include pedestrian facilities currently. And even of that 20%, about 7% of it is on local streets. So local streets oftentimes do not require sidewalks because, like I mentioned, lower speed, lower volumes. You can share the road with both vehicles and pedestrians, not have quite as big of a safety concern. And so, yeah, a lot of the pedestrian network within the city is already pretty well built out. Great, thank you. Thank you for that question. Okay, yeah, so for the bicycle network level of traffic stress, like I was saying, a lot more of the city is at the level of traffic stress 3 or 4. So how that translates into the project list is that a lot of our projects that we've identified are trying to improve the level of traffic stress for a lot more of these bicycle facilities out there, making sure that there's a lot more continuous connections of level of traffic stress 1 and 2 on the primary network. So the standards that we're setting for the bicycle level of traffic stress are the same as what we're setting for pedestrians. Primary network, we're trying to achieve level of traffic stress 1 or 2. And then for bicycle, or for the secondary network, level of traffic stress 1, 2, or 3 is acceptable. Okay, and so this map here identifies the pedestrian and bicycle projects that we've identified throughout the city. And so these projects are intended to fill in those level of traffic stress gaps, we'll call them, shown on those previous maps. So the purple projects are bicycle projects. You can see there's quite a few more of those. The yellowish orange ones are pedestrian projects. And then the green ones are multi-use paths. So those would be facilities that are used by both pedestrians and bicyclists. So the range of improvements that we've identified are both infrastructure and non-infrastructure related. So the non-infrastructure projects can include reducing speed limits or providing alternative connections, say provide a parallel route where you can't achieve the desired level of traffic stress because the speed and volume on a particular roadway is too high. And then on the infrastructure side, we're looking at sort of your range of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So for pedestrians, that's typically either a multi-use path or a sidewalk. For a sidewalk, we look at different types of separation from the vehicle travel lanes, whether that's providing a landscape buffer, providing a parking buffer, something like that, to provide a little bit of additional separation from between the pedestrians and the vehicles. For the bicycle network, we're looking at different types of bicycle facilities. So that's bicycle lanes and different types of separation of that bicycle lane from the vehicle traffic. So that can include just a painted buffer on the side of the road. That would be something like is along Swift right now today. Or if there is a greater degree of separation where you have a painted buffer plus some sort of vertical separation in the buffer between the bicyclist and the vehicle travel lane. So that would be something like what is proposed as part of the downtown loop project. And so I won't walk through all of these projects here and what exactly is provided at each of them, but those are sort of the range of options that we're looking at for some of these bicycle and pedestrian improvements.
Hi, sorry. Is AT 18, Is that George Washington Way at McMurray?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I will, what I should also mention is that there's some of those DOT projects, those are spent essentially like spot improvements for pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. So those two, AT 17 and 18, I believe are the numbers that I'm seeing up there, are two improvements on George Washington Way. So those are areas along George Washington where the bike lane drops through the intersection. The bike lane goes away to accommodate a left turn lane. So we're looking at options there to widen the sidewalk to provide opportunities for bikes to ramp up onto the sidewalks, get through the intersections, and then ramp back down to get back into the bike lane as they travel between intersections.
So that wouldn't be an area where there would be like a strip in between, not necessarily a barrier, but like a vacant space between traffic and cycling bike lanes. They would be, the cyclists would then just go up onto the sidewalk?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just because of the limited right-of-way there's not a whole lot of additional room to like widen the road to provide that additional separation.
Yeah, I'm curious, that's a section, like the McMurray George Washington Way section intersection is where we've had several car versus pedestrian or cyclist accidents. I don't know that it's necessarily related, like it's during crossing, so how do you address that when it's just it's not necessarily even a bike lane issue, it's a driving issue? I mean, I don't know.
Safety, visibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's opportunities. I believe leading pedestrian intervals have been implemented at that intersection. So that's one option to improve the pedestrian visibility. It's the main thing at a lot of those locations is really making sure that there's better driver awareness of high crossing activity, that people are crossing the road. And so we don't have any of those specific improvements in those projects. Those are, again, are some more of those safety, like systematic safety improvements that can be identified. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that those are all good things to think about, but I will say that they're not included in that specific project.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional questions on specific projects? So as part of the packet tonight, we provided the full project list that goes through and gives all the details about all the projects on this list and on these maps. So if there's any questions about any of those, I'm happy to pop open the map and walk through any specific questions.
I don't think we have any questions at this time, but was your presentation in part of the packet, was that included as well?
Yes, yeah. So the packet includes these maps plus the project list, so you can sort of cross-reference the two to put these project numbers to specific improvement descriptions.
Thank you.
Okay. And so with that, I will just give a high-level overview of our next steps. So we will be holding an open house tomorrow to present this project list to the community, get some feedback on the projects on this list. I think Nicole will be touching on this in a second. And then we're looking to finalize the draft of the TSP next month. So that will be available for Planning Commission review soon thereafter.